Today is the day, Bulls fans, a day that could define the trajectory of this franchise, a day where we could be happy about the Bulls' lackluster performance this season, a day which we could finally have something to cheer about, but also a day that is very unlikely to happen. Well, not the day the NBA draft lottery is going to be happening either way, but rather the Bulls' chances of hitting on the draft lottery are incredibly small, with the Bulls only having an 8.5% chance of keeping their pick for it to move up into the top 4 and a 1.8% chance of the real prize, the number 1 pick, for a chance at getting the prospect of a lifetime in Victor Wembanyama. Unlikely to happen, we know, but we can't help but think there is maybe the sliver of a chance that the Bulls experienced back in 2008 when they had less than a 2% chance of getting the number 1 pick, which netted them Derrick Rose. Well, we will all know how things shake out later tonight, but rather than bring bad vibes to this draft lottery, we're going to be speaking it into existence tonight. And in this video, we're going to be discussing why the Bulls landing in the top 4 and keeping their pick changes everything. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. First of all, apologies that I haven't been as active in putting out content on the channel. I mean, it is the offseason after all for the Bulls, and we're still a little too early in this period where we hear about trade rumors, free agency decisions, and honestly, after the draft order is situated, we'll have a better understanding of how the Bulls will approach their offseason. I've also just been uploading a lot on the second channel, the NBA channel, because the playoffs are in full swing, so I'll try and ensure that I get more content in on this channel as well. But either way, big night in the NBA, well, for the lottery teams anyway, and because the Bulls missed the playoffs, they're one of the lottery teams. So here is how things will work out tonight as it relates to the Bulls lottery odds and where they will likely fall, and then I'll discuss more about what keeping the pick would mean for the Bulls and their path forward. So because the Bulls finished with the 11th worst record in the league, they actually tied with Oklahoma City Thunder in the standings, but won the coin flip that gave them the 11th spot versus the 12th, and because they finished with the 11th worst record in the league, they have the highest odds to land the number 11 pick, about a 77% chance of the pick landing at 11, while a small chance that the pick could even go to 12, 13, or 14, depending on if any teams jump them to move up into the top 4. And there's another thing to call out, because there is this common misconception that you could still move around the draft lottery no matter where you finish in the standings. That is actually not the case. The draft lottery itself is only for the top 4 picks, meaning the 14 lottery teams all have a chance of their pick moving up into the top 4. And that's what the ping pong balls are drawn for, to select 4 teams with the top 4 picks. The odds are obviously more heavily favored for the worst teams in the league, but every lottery team has a shot at a top 4 pick. For the teams that don't land in the top 4, the picks are then determined by record, worst to best, for picks 5 through 14. That's why the Bulls pick will not land 5 through 10, because they would only be able to move up into the top 4, and if one of those teams behind them, positions 12 through 14, jump them moving into the top 4, then their pick would fall back to 12, 13, and so on. So a lot of detail there, I know, but at the end of the day, 8.5% chance the Bulls have at keeping their pick, 91.5% chance that pick is going to the Orlando Magic. So really, if any team jumps the Bulls in the lottery and the Bulls fall backward to 12, 13, or 14, it doesn't really hurt them because they're losing that pick anyway. It actually hurt the Orlando Magic with getting a worse pick. But we're just going to be talking about the 8.5% chance. Again, we're speaking it into existence. What happens if the Bulls land in the top 4? Well, it changes everything for this franchise that is currently bereft of a direction. You see, in this stacked draft class, the top 4 picks in particular are all expected to be incredible players in the NBA. Wembanyama being talked about the greatest prospect of this generation, the greatest prospect since LeBron James. Scoot Henderson, who's expected to go number 2, although he has fallen to number 3 on some mock draft boards, with Brandon Miller out of Alabama jumping ahead of him. But either way, both of these guys are expected to have star potential and potential franchise players. And then Amen Thompson to round out the top 4, all players who are going to have solid careers in the NBA. Now, the biggest reason why the Bulls landing a top 4 pick is so key is the obvious. They get to keep their pick. For a team that has little in the way of things to work with for their future, with limited draft capital they have, that's huge to be able to even keep the pick in the first place and have another young up-and-coming top-level prospect to build for the future, in a future that, as of right now, seems very uncertain. But keeping the pick aside, here's why the pick, whether it lands 1 through 4, changes everything for this franchise and how they position their direction for the group. If the Bulls land in the top 4, it'll mean changes in one of 2 ways. Either the Bulls actually keep the pick, select a top prospect, and choose a path where they do somewhat of a retool. They trade their veteran players like DeRozan, Vucevic. Technically, he could leave in free agency, but for him, his options are limited, so the Bulls could potentially work to do a sign-and trade. They get some pieces back in the form of draft capital or young players for both Vucevic and DeRozan. It probably won't be much because their trade value isn't insanely high, but they're still quality, productive, starting level players in the NBA that could net you a decent return. You might have to take on a bad contract for salary filler if you trade one of them, but either way, it gives the Bulls an avenue for a new direction. A top prospect entering the league. You still have young players in Patrick Williams, Coby White, Dosunmu, Dalen Terry, while also maintaining some of your veterans who are still in their prime, like Zach Lavine, Alex Caruso, and again, hopefully you would get some additional assets in return for trading DeMar or a sign and trade for Vucevic. Now, some of this is going to be dependent on what pick it is. Like if it's number 1 or number 2, Wemby or Scoot, who are expected to be franchise level players in the future, that's obviously going to impact how aggressive the Bulls are going to be in starting fresh with a young core. Like, would they even consider trading Lavine, who probably has the highest trade value of anyone on the roster, given he's still young in his prime and he's still under contract for some time, rather than trading DeMar, who is on an expiring deal at age 33. I mean, if you get Wembanyama and you move on from all of your big three, get as much draft capital, young players as you can, and you just start fresh and building around Wemby, because again, if he's as good as scouts are saying he is, that's a player that is franchise altering that you immediately start building around for the future. If it's the 3rd or the 4th pick, I mean, Brandon Miller is still expected to be really good. Landing him is still great, even if you miss out on Wemby or Scoot. But the 4th pick, again, still incredible if you're the Bulls because you actually get to keep your pick instead of sending it to Orlando. But the 4th pick, you assume it's going to be Amin Thompson. Probably not something you're going to be as aggressive in rebuilding the roster around immediately as opposed to someone like Wembanyama. And then the other direction, should the Bulls land in the top 4. The other direction for which would also change everything for the future of this franchise, for the good or for the bad potentially, but that's if they trade the pick. They trade the pick, package it in a deal to land a superstar, win now player to complement the current roster. They stick with their core big three. They make one last push with DeMar in the final year of his deal and re-signing Vucevic. Now again, it all depends on what pick it is. Like if you're getting the number 4 pick, yeah, you're not going to get as much in return, and it might be more challenging to package the pick with other assets to get a bona fide superstar. But if it's the number 1 pick, teams chomping at the bit to get Wemby, you're talking about a bidding war for teams willing to risk it all to get that number 1 pick. Like, would the Mavs bite on trading Luka for the number 1 pick? Obviously, there would need to be other pieces to make a trade like that work, given Luka is on a max contract, and more just talking about the main piece of a trade package like this, which would feature Wembanyama for Luka Doncic. Or maybe a player like Damian Lillard. Lillard has made it pretty clear he has no appetite for playing on a team that is still years out from competing. He wants to win now. Now, that's a much more unlikely scenario because if the Blazers did trade Dame, getting Wemby would be nice, but the Bulls are also going to want other assets to go along with that, considering Lillard's age and his contract. Like, you're still taking on some risk by trading for Lillard. You're going to have to send more to the Bulls if you're giving them Wemby. And for the Blazers, if you're moving on from Lillard and starting a fresh rebuild, they're not going to want to give up additional picks and young players that the Bulls would be seeking. That would defeat the whole purpose of the rebuild. Or is there also a scenario of, say, a team that was actually tanking for this guy, meaning Wembanyama, and they're willing to get him at all costs? Say a team like the Pistons, the Rockets, or the Spurs, would they send a haul to the Bulls for the number 1 pick, including their own lottery pick from this year, wherever they land, as well as multiple future first-round picks? Tough to say how much teams are willing to go all in for a chance at the Frenchman. But what I will say, and I want to be clear on this because I can already see it in the comments, you're crazy for even suggesting the Bulls should trade the pick in the unlikely event they actually get to keep it. I personally think trading the pick would be a huge mistake. If you get the number 1 pick, you have a chance at a franchise-altering player. No amount of picks or aging stars can really make up for that, especially since we're looking more long-term here. So no, I would much prefer that the Bulls, if they do get the top 4 pick, that they keep it, make a selection, keep the player, and retool by building around that player, focusing more on their youth and development, while still managing to be competitive and flipping their older veteran players like DeMar for more draft capital to young players. That's how you ensure that you're building for the future, a much brighter future than the Bulls have going for them right now. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.